All right, everybody, we're just about ready to get started. I see there are a number of people still trickling in, and we'll get going in just another second here. All right, so if you're here for the OKR webinar, Best Practices from the Field, you've come to the right place. And if you're expecting something totally different, well, you should still hang out because this will be good. So today's it's a very special expert series. We have two of the world's leading experts on objectives and key results, book authors of a best-selling OKR book on Amazon, and it's Ben Lamorte and Paul Niven. They're both joining together, so you can actually enjoy this from listening to them speak about this topic, but also ask real open live questions. And I hope you've brought some really hard questions to ask. And I am Zorian. I'm CEO and founder at A-Team. We're sponsoring this webinar, and we're very excited. So really quickly here for the admin component. So how can you ask questions? So if you have the desktop app, you can ask questions over here in this field in questions, and the questioning is enabled. We will get to these questions at the very end. We actually have a list of questions that were emailed to us. There are about 10 of them or so, if I remember correctly. We'll cover those at the end, so please wait patiently. There's some really good information to be shared and some of the common frequently asked questions. And then at the very end, we'll get to all the open questions you're going to post, if you have any, in the questions field. So our agenda is we're going to do the introductions really quickly. I'd like to introduce our guest speakers and experts. We'll talk about OKR fundamentals and best practices. The OKR adoption framework from Ben and Paul. It's really helpful, really thoughtful. Hopefully you'll have questions on that. And then I'll talk very briefly about A-Team in case any of you have been wondering, who is A-Team and what kind of software do we do? And then get the open Q&A, and hopefully you'll have questions for that. So with no further ado, let me introduce Paul Niven. He's a practitioner first, then consultant, then writer. And being a practitioner is very important because OKRs are not merely theory, it's a really practical application. Paul was a consultant and is an author of 6 books, which is pretty incredible. Writing 6 books is an incredible accomplishment. And Paul has been a consultant to some of the best companies out there, Panasonic, Anheuser-Busch, U.S. Navy, that's pretty awesome, and Dun & Bradstreet. And Ben Lamorte, also extremely well known in the OKR space, has studied at Stanford, started his career in management consulting, spent 10 years in driver-based planning and financial models, led multiple teams and in sales and marketing. And last 5 years has been globally renowned as an OKR coach and trainer, helped tons of companies, hundreds of managers, has clients globally, just like Paul, of course. And the clients include Sears, Zalando, Career Builder, eBay, and also Dun & Bradstreet. In fact, Ben and Paul work together with Dun & Bradstreet. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paul and Ben.
All right, well, thanks so much. Okay, I think, can you guys all hear me okay, Zorian?
Yes, it's perfect. I can hear you.
Okay, great. I think Paul may just be off just for a minute, so I'm going to take this one and just let you guys know. The history of OKRs goes back, really, if we want to go back to the 1950s, we talk about Peter Drucker and management by objectives, MBOs, as it's commonly known. Most everyone I talk to has heard about MBOs, okay? And I want to be really clear that this is the origin of OKRs. So OKRs is not some new buzzword thing that just sort of came along, last week or something. It's been around really for, half a century. And the thing about MBOs is that MBOs, well, they were pretty much linked to compensation, and they still are. So for example, my last job, well, 2 jobs ago actually, we had MBOs. But your MBOs were determined your bonus. So obviously, since you had your MBOs to determine your bonus, you would not simply broadcast that and make it public. It was kept private between you and your boss, typically. And the OKR, I'm sorry, the management by objectives often was an annual cadence as opposed to something more frequent. And typically, even though I think Peter Drucker designed MBOs to be more conversational and bottoms up as opposed to tops down, MBOs ended up being more tops down. That's how they're typically being used. Now, Paul, are you back with us?
I am, Ben. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so if you want to just take over on OKRs, I just started talking about MBOs.
Good. Thanks, everyone. Sorry about that. Some technical difficulties on my part here. Yeah, the problem with the MBOs was not really the idea itself. It was, if you look at the history of Drucker's writings, it was well received and made great common sense. But the problem was a lot of organizations really implemented it incorrectly. They would link it to compensation. It ultimately became a top-down bureaucratic exercise, and it was soon fell out of favor. But you fast forward a couple of decades and you get to Andy Grove at Intel, and he recognized the power of this MBO model, but he modified it a bit. And really we can consider him the founder of our modern OKR terminology, because he said what we really need to do in organizations is answer two fundamental questions. Where do I want to go, and how will I know I'm getting there? How can I pace myself to get there, is what he actually said. And from that, he developed, again, what we would consider the modern OKR model. And he made some drastic improvements, some major improvements. He decoupled it from compensation right away so that people couldn't set deliberately low targets to achieve a financial reward. He did that. He also made the OKRs public so that there was transparency and everybody could see what everybody else was working on. And that became an enormous benefit. Originally, OKRs were done monthly at Intel, and I know that's a question we're going to talk about later, so we'll come back to that. Now, back in the 1980s, was a gentleman named John Doerr, who is now a venture capitalist at Kleiner Perkins in Silicon Valley, but he began his career at Intel, and he learned all he could from Andy Grove. And one of the things he learned from Andy Grove was the power of OKRs. And when he became a venture capitalist, he took that to Google, where he was an early investor. He tells a story that we recount in the book of a very, very early, one of the first board meetings at Google. There were only about 30 employees, and it was above an ice cream shop on University Avenue in Palo Alto. And he introduced the idea of OKRs, and they were taken immediately by Sergey Brin and Larry Page. They loved the idea, and of course, now it's been used at Google ever since. And since the release of Rick Clow's video that some of you may have seen in 2013, the idea has taken off across Silicon Valley and the world. I know we've both worked with clients around the globe, and this is moving beyond Silicon Valley to more what we would consider traditional businesses. So a very powerful idea who we believe whose time has come. Let's move on, Zorain. So I know you have a lot of questions about OKRs and how do they actually work, and Ben is going to talk about that, and we'll talk about how you adopt them in an organization. But some people ask us right away, well, why should we invest in this? You know, tell us why this is worth it. So we're going to begin with some benefits. And there are several. The first is perhaps the most important. They're easy to understand. For some reason in the strategy execution world, we seem to be getting more complex when I think organizations demand simplicity. We see so many models with 9 steps to this, 8 steps to that, and complex diagrams. The beauty of OKRs is really you're talking about 3 words. Objectives, where do we want to go? Key results, how will we know we're successful in achieving that objective? That is an enormous benefit. Ben and I have seen with our clients that we can get people up and running and using OKRs within a couple of hours. Tremendous benefit. The shorter cadence is another great benefit of OKRs. Ben talked about Peter Drucker and MBOs, and one of the problems that people would only set annual goals. Well, of course, between the time you set an annual goal and the time you look at it 365 days later, a lot has changed in your business. What's really important for us now, and all of our businesses are changing, the competition is getting greater all the time, is we need to capture, analyze, and transform information into knowledge so that we can improve our business results. And we do that with OKRs because they have that shorter cadence, typically quarterly, but again, for some organizations it could be different, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But that shorter cadence is a tremendous benefit because it gets us thinking about results faster. OKRs focus on what matters most. The idea here is not to look at what we do on a day-to-day basis and track that. We've got lots of tools and dashboards that can help us with that. It's, as we say here, separating the signal from the noise by looking at what are the most important things that we can really do that will make a difference for this business. And we look at what our strategy is and where we want to go. What are the few things that, again, can really drive business value for us. So it's not day-to-day. It's what can really make a significant strategic difference. Transparency is important with OKRs. This is something that Google has really focused on since day one. Everyone sees everyone else's OKRs. And there's a lot of statistics out there right now about the importance of cross-functional collaboration in organizations. It's well documented that a lot of organizations are changing the way they work, they're changing their structures, and it's more important than ever that groups work together. And a first step into facilitating that is allowing people to see other people's goals so that we can look for those dependencies and we can really facilitate that cross-functional collaboration. OKRs drive engagement. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but the statistics on engagement around the world are pretty dismal. Gallup suggests that here in the United States, only about 30% of employees are actively engaged with their companies. And this has huge ramifications. It's been suggested that disengaged employees cost their employers about $17,000 per year, which when you aggregate across the entire economy is about $500 billion. And we think that OKRs, well, actually we know, we've seen this with our clients, can help drive engagement, because one of the reasons people are not engaged is that they don't really understand what the company's strategy is or how they fit in. And with OKRs, those are really the first two things you have to answer. You have to know what the strategy is so you can determine how you can contribute. And then you do just that. You develop objectives and key results that signal your contribution to the organization. So this gives you a stake in what's going on. It also improves your relationship with your manager, because often, and Ben will talk about this, you negotiate your OKRs with the person to whom you report. So it allows for better, more structured, more productive conversations that ultimately drive engagement. Finally, OKRs promote visionary thinking. Again, we're not talking here about the day-to-day, the mundane that we all have to do, the fires we have to fight. Google often uses a term, and we see it with other clients as well, where they talk about moonshots. What are the really aspirational things that can take our business to the next level? And that's what we're looking at with OKRs. What are the things that can really make a difference to our business? So some people say, well, okay, but show me the numbers. Yeah, this is a developing field, and we'll talk about this when we get to your questions towards the end. But we are seeing some empirical evidence of the power of OKRs. You can see here at the top a slide from statistic from Deloitte. Companies that do goal setting quarterly are 3.5 times more likely to be top performers in their industry. And we've also got a quote here from Chris Mason from Sears Holding. They saw an increase in their average sales per hour of 8.5% for the group of employees that used OKRs. And he talks about this not only being statistically significant, but practically significant, because again, why were these employees more effective? Well, they understood the strategy, they saw how they fit in, they had a stake in the operation's success. So we are seeing empirical evidence of OKR success the more the model is used around the world. So those are some benefits. How would we actually define the OKR system? Well, in our book, Ben and I describe it as a critical thinking framework and ongoing discipline that seeks to ensure employees work together, focusing their efforts to make measurable contributions. And we sort of joke that no one's going to put that on a t-shirt anytime soon, and that's true. But it is really important that you think about why you're using OKRs and you have a consistent definition of what you think the framework is for you. One of the problems we see in organizations all the time is inconsistency with definitions of things. And if you don't know why you're using OKRs and if you don't define it consistently, that can lead to a real problem. So let me briefly unpack this definition. First of all, it's a critical thinking framework. Ultimately, you're going to invest in OKRs because you want to improve your business performance. You want to accelerate results. But you don't do that by simply looking at the numbers every quarter and saying, that's interesting. You dig a little deeper. We talk about being business anthropologists. And we say, what are the numbers telling us? Drucker, who we started talking about a few moments ago, said that the biggest problem in organizations is not trying to find the right answers. It's asking the wrong questions. So we encourage our clients to use the results from their OKRs to really ask better questions to drive business results and insights. It's an ongoing discipline. Again, one of the big problems organizations would have, and this was the downfall of MBOs, is that they tend to be set it and forget it. You set the goal and then you go on about your daily work and you never look at it again. The idea here is, and this is why this quarterly cadence is so important, you want to be looking at your results more frequently. We often talk about the fact that we're building a muscle with our clients here. For a lot of organizations, they don't have this discipline. They've had a habit of developing these metrics that they don't look at it again, but we want to help them build that muscle, and the ongoing discipline of OKRs helps that. I talked briefly a moment ago about the importance of cross-functional alignment and collaboration, and OKRs, of course, assist with this because of what we talked about, and that is transparency. When Ben and I work with our clients, we really focus them on not only developing OKRs that work for them, but we challenge them with these questions. Who do you depend upon in the organization to help you achieve this OKR? And who depends upon you to achieve their OKRs? We really get people thinking about this from the outset so that we can build in this alignment and collaboration from the outset of the process. OKRs are about focusing efforts. It's not a task list. If you've got an OKR and you look at the key result and it's something you could do in an hour, or interview a new HR manager, or send out a report, that's a task. It's not a key result. It doesn't represent what's most important and what really drives value for your organization. So you've got to be focused on that. And finally, OKRs are about making measurable contributions to the business. The ultimate arbiter here is achievement of your goals. So we feel that by developing quantitative key results that really drive business value, you can make measurable contributions to the OKR system. So again, we doubt anybody will put this on a t-shirt soon, but it's important for you to keep those criteria in mind. Ben, I'll let you walk us through now an example of what an OKR looks like.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And just first of all, on that last slide with the definition, I just want to be really clear. It's not everything we do is measurable. So one of the misconceptions about OKRs was, oh, if I don't see something in the OKRs, I guess it's not important. Or why isn't my work for this week, clearly directly in the OKRs? We don't expect 100% of your effort to be, reflected in your OKRs. It might be 50%, it might be 80%, it might be 30%, depends, right? So, and it's not worth it to measure everything. That's just another important point. So I don't want anybody to interpret OKRs as some framework that says, now everything we do is measurable, and if we don't measure it, therefore we're not going to do it. So with that as sort of some context, let's actually look at some examples of an OKR. And the best way to really understand OKRs is to look at examples and then actually to start creating some of your own OKRs. So as I'm giving you this example, I really want you to be thinking about, well, what is your team's objective and how would we know you've achieved it? So the objective answers the question, what do we want to do? And this particular OKR is a real example from a client. Of course, I've changed the numbers, but this was a digital marketing team, and their objective was delight customers with relevant offers and communications. So this particular objective, and we could debate whether or not we thought that this was a good objective, but notice that it's all in plain English. I mean, delight customers with relevant offers and communications. I pretty much understand it. So I thought, okay, that's good enough. Let's talk about how will we know that we've delighted customers with relevant offers and communications. And again, this was a marketing team, so they have words in there like relevant offers. When we talk in the language of objectives, we say things like that. Delight customers with relevant offers. What in the world are we talking about? Which customers are we delighting? How do we know they're delighted? What is an offer? What does it mean that it's relevant offer? What kinds of communications are we sending here? So the key results really is where you want to spend most of your time, and you'll see the key result is answering the question, how will we know we've met our objective? So I simply ask them, how will we know that we've delighted customers with relevant offers and communications at the end of the quarter? How will we know? It's a basic OKRs question. And the answers that you normally get are things like, well, we just need to add 3 new fields to the marketing database. That's the first thing we need to do, actually. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the human nature. The human nature is to simply say, here's what we need to do in order to achieve the objective. But as Paul said, key results are not about the things we need to do. They're about the outcomes we need to create. So I would ask the question, what is the intended outcome of adding 3 new fields to the marketing database? And they would say, well, that's obvious. We need to send better emails. So I would ask the question, well, how do we know we've sent better emails? Better according to whom? And then they would say, oh, well, we've got lots of metrics for that. We've got, open rates, we got bounce back, we got average time on page. They could list me 20 metrics. And I said, well, I don't want 20 metrics. Can you tell me the single metric? What is the one thing that would have to increase or be, improved in order for us to say that our emails are better? And as we started talking, we finally came up with increased revenue per email sent by 10%. I remember this conversation. Improving the email open rate, are you telling me that means the customers are delighted? Look at, we've all opened emails before. It has nothing to do with being delighted, and it doesn't even mean it's relevant. It just means the subject was, eye-catching. So we ended up coming with this increased revenue per email sent by 10%, and we thought, but that would be amazing. Like, this would be a truly amazing outcome. So one of the most important questions you can ask yourself when you think about key results, back to the concept of stretch, right, real aspirational, to say, what would be the most amazing outcome you can imagine? All right, let's go to the next slide. So there are basically three different types of key results. Baseline key results are used especially when you're first getting started with OKRs and you don't even know what your baseline is. Okay, so rather, in this example, rather than saying, create a 40% coupon redemption rate, this was actually based on a real conversation that Paul and I were having with a client. Look, well, we haven't even launched the coupons. So why are we saying, create a 40% coupon redemption? We don't even know what the baseline coupon redemption rate will be. And this happens over and over again. Now at Twitter, you're not even allowed to create a key result unless you can specify increase it from X to Y. If you're going to create a metric key result, you have to actually list what the baseline is in the key result. In other words, you must be already measuring it before you set a target. And you should not be ashamed of yourself if you have a lot of baseline key results in the beginning. After all, what you're doing is you're committing to measuring the things that are the most important things to improve. Now, as you get going with OKRs, you're going to see more and more metric key results. These are the standard sort of way that we would think of key results. So an example of a metric key result is increase the net promoter score from 40% to 50%, or from 40 to 50, or increase retention rate from 80% to 90%, right? Those are positive metrics. You can imagine negative metrics would be reduce the time it takes to process invoices from 1 week to 3 days, or something along those lines. In general, we're going to recommend try to frame it positively because that's like getting more of a good thing. What you wouldn't want, and finance teams, are mostly guilty of this, no more than 5 mistakes on financial reports. If you think about that key result, it's going to create a walking on eggshells kind of a feeling. And then a milestone key result is used if you cannot come up with a metric key result. You want to really push yourself to come up with a metric key result, and every now and then you can't do that. I worked with one team in Germany, and their whole job for the quarter was to release push notification. And I kept asking them, well, how many push notifications do you want to release? And they said, look, it's not our job to send out the push notifications to the customers. And I kept asking questions, right? Well, how will we know that releasing push notifications makes an impact that's positive for our company? And we went back and forth in circles, and they said, well, we did beta tests on that, and we proved it already. And look, it's just going to be an amazing outcome if we can just get this push notification released by the end of the quarter. And I had to keep asking more and more questions. How will we know that push notification has been released? And they said, well, that's the, the VP of marketing says that it's been released. They can just say it is because it's in practice. And so I kept on trying to get a metric key result, but finally I had to cave in and say, I guess this really is a milestone key result because it really is an important binary outcome. So a quick note on that, though. We will talk about how to measure progress of milestone key results using a scoring system that's a little bit more advanced and beyond the scope of this conversation, but I'm happy to discuss that a little bit later offline. Let's hop over to the next slide. So when people are getting started with OKRs, by far the biggest problem or the biggest challenge that they have is creating high quality key results. Okay, like they're going to create a task list, or they're going to just simply put everything on there. So I've divided this list of effective characteristics into 2 groups, the must-have and the should-have, okay? First of all, key results are key results, not all results. So some people often come up to me and say, hey, so could hiring 3 new people be a key result? Well, if you're a sales team and you hire 3 people, let's say every quarter, hiring 3 people really isn't a key result for your sales team. It's just something you do. It's a business as usual, practice. On the other hand, if you're an engineering team and you're a total of 3 people and you're trying to double the size to 3 people by the end of the quarter, hiring 3 people could actually be considered a key result. So you got to think about really what is a key result for our team. Specific and measurable pretty much go hand in hand. And a classic example of this is again, it's almost embarrassing to me that these are real world stories. I'm not going to name the client, but they actually had a key result called 10 use cases on the new platform. So we call this the haiku-ification of key results. 10 use cases on the new platform. Well, as it turns out, the CEO had told the VP of engineering that this would be a great key result. The VP of engineering said, yep, I'm on it. Our team's going to get the 10 use cases on the new platform. At the end of the quarter, they said, well, how did we do? And the VP of engineering said, well, listen, we totally blew this out. We actually got 12 use cases on the new platform. Well, luckily, they all had agreed on what the new platform was. But as it turns out, they did not know what a use case was. So after they presented the 12 use cases, the CEO just had a dumbfounded expression and said, well, what about the marketing use case? And the VP of engineering said, what are you talking about? So you don't want the learning of the OKR cycle to be that we don't know what we're talking about. And so really taking the time to write out the key result very clearly and specifically is going to be worth it. Again, results, not tasks, right? So you're supposed to think about the outcome. Remember in the example of add 3 fields to the marketing database, that's not really a result. That's just something we do. What is the real outcome that we're going for? And then clear, I think that speaks for itself. But I want to emphasize not to use acronyms that only your team knows. So if you're in finance and you put EBITDA, you might think EBITDA is just totally, everybody knows what EBITDA means, right? Well, that's true if you're in finance. But remember, OKRs are designed to be speaking and resonating with people outside of your team. And I guarantee you there are many people outside of finance that have no idea what you're talking about when you put in acronyms like EBITDA. And again, aspirational is another must-have. If you're really doing OKRs, and this is somewhat debatable, I think Paul and I came up and we said, look, if you're not setting aspirational key results, I'm sorry, you're not doing OKRs. You're doing something else like, goal definitions or sort of expected levels of achievement or something. The whole point of OKRs, the key results must be aspirational. They have to be amazing outcomes. We don't expect you to achieve every one of these. That's why you should score them or grade them. And we expect you're not going to achieve a perfect score on this. In fact, the classic example from Google is if you achieve a perfect score on your OKRs, you're just not setting your goals high enough. You're sort of defeating the purpose of OKRs. And then I'm going to skip the should haves, but I do want to emphasize one of them, which is progress, number 3. Okay, and I'll speak from personal experience. If all of your key results are such that you won't know whether you've made progress till the end of the quarter, for example, those binary milestone things like release push notification, or for example, a survey where you won't know the survey result until the very last week of the quarter, if you can't see that you're making progress on at least one key result every couple weeks, there's going to be no point in having these weekly check-ins or sort of performance progress meetings, because you're going to just get this bad feeling of, well, we're not making any progress. We won't know until the end. So I really recommend designing key results so that some of them can be, quote, progressible throughout the quarter. All right, let's hop over to the next slide. Wow, we're totally blowing through this. We're already halfway through the webinar, and this is our last slide, formal material, which is great because I've been talking so quickly because we can't wait to get into your questions.
Ben, and there are a lot of questions, by the way, just so that you know. So.
Okay, good. We'll keep the questions coming. I think this slide is something that our clients requested. And back to what Paul said about how OKRs are very simple. There are not. It's not like you have to go through the 9 steps. Well, it turns out, you do have to go through the 9 steps. We put them here. But these are super intuitive, basic, obvious things. There's no rocket science here. So what I'm going to do is Paul and I are going to kind of walk you through these steps. And they're not necessarily totally sequential, but they're sort of loosely sequential. And as you're listening to us talk about these steps, we're hoping we'll even generate more questions.
Right.
So the first one, absolutely critical, okay? Start at the top and determine why you're doing OKRs. This is usually the senior executive team, and we just need one sentence, okay? So don't give me a paragraph on, we're doing OKRs for all these various reasons. Paul and I have run into organizations where they say, well, why are we doing OKRs? And basically their answer is, well, because Google does it. Of course, this is not a good answer. You want an answer. One of our clients, I'll mention them, Zalando, had an incredibly good answer. It was just one sentence. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like, we are doing OKRs in order to improve cross-functional alignment as our company grows so we can prevent silo effects. Boom. That's it. Now, there could be other reasons why you're doing OKRs, but you really want to get that singular reason that's super crisp and clear because you're going to have to answer that question all the time. So, Paul, anything to add to that one?
No, I think you said it really well, Ben. I think we're so busy today that everybody's going to be, the first question people will ask is why are we doing this? I've got a million other things. And if you can't answer that question convincingly and consistently, you're in big trouble. So just jump onto the second one here, that clearly defined roles for the program. Well, I guess we'll say this for every single one, Ben. This is really important as well because you've got great software out there like a team, and Zorin will tell you more about that towards the end of the program today. But OKRs itself is not like a software program that you plug in and it works. It's a management framework, and so it's got to be nurtured and it's got to be really taken care of within the organization. So we found 3 roles to be really critical. The first is an executive sponsor. Somebody at the C-level of the organization has to be responsible for this. They have to own it so that it gets that visibility within the organization. Otherwise, we can almost guarantee that it will wither and die if you don't have that support. You need what we call an OKRs lead. You could call it an OKRs champion, but that's your in-house expert. You know, we'd be happy to work with all of you and help you get your OKRs up and running, but we don't work for your organizations. You need somebody in the in-house who is the go-to person. They understand OKRs. They can liaise with programs like this. They can determine how you're going to link OKRs to performance reviews, just help you through those difficult things. And lastly, we need what we call OKRs ambassadors. And those are people throughout the organization that are going to be kind of your internal go-to people scattered throughout the organization. Malcolm Gladwell, in one of his books, talks about connectors, or people that really, you know, they move easily throughout the organization, and they have more influence than their title would convey. And that's the kind of people we're looking for, people that are thought leaders, and they get this, and they want to be involved in it. They are a really important part of the program as well.
Okay, yeah, and then the next one is the deployment parameters. And I was just on a conversation with another company in Berlin earlier this morning, and they totally got the importance of agreeing on these deployment parameters. Because what I mean by this is when you're first getting started, you don't have to have all of the right answers to every possible question, but you at least have to have agreement at the executive level on here is the answer to that question for now. We can always make a mistake, right? And the idea here is, look, we have to have a consistent approach to OKRs, and we have to know where to go to get these basic answers to these questions. For example, how will we score OKRs? You know, how often will we set OKRs? Are we using quarterly, or are we also using an annual cadence, for example, at the top level of the organization? And how many OKRs are you allowed to create? You know, can you have 3 objectives, or can you have 5 objectives, or are you only allowed to have 1 objective? Some organizations, actually, especially when they're first starting with OKRs, mandate that you must only have 1 objective. It's very interesting to think about coming up with how you will link OKRs to the individual performance reviews, and if you will link OKRs to individual performance reviews. What Paul and I will tell you is you need to know definitively the answer to this question before you roll out OKRs. Otherwise, this becomes the thing that's on everybody's mind in the hallway. And so coming out and sort of proactively announcing these deployment parameters up front will really improve, I would say, the efficiency at which we deploy OKRs, and also increase the buy-in. One of the other deployment parameters is at what level in the organization will we set OKRs? And Paul and I will just come right out here and say, whatever you do, do not set individual level OKRs right from the start. And again, I don't want to get into that right now because, you know, this is going to be an essay of conversations. But what we'll tell you is getting clear about these deployment parameters right up front is absolutely essential, and documenting those deployment parameters so that everyone can go to that document that says, okay, here are the answers to these super basic questions. Absolutely critical before you get started.
Great. And I'll take the next couple here because they kind of go together. You know, we've talked about the fact that OKR is a big benefit of the program is that it's simple to get that buy-in. You've got 3 basic words, objectives and key results, but there are subtleties, you know, and we're just touching the tip of the iceberg, as Ben mentioned in this webinar. But you know, you have to train people about what are the characteristics of an effective objective, characteristics of an effective key result. What about the types of key results that Ben talked about? You know, most of this is intuitive, but like all things, there are subtleties here. So it's really important that you provide training throughout the organization. And this is where you lean on that OKRs lead that we talked about. That's probably the person that's going to be leading your in-house training. So really critical not to overlook it just because it seems simple. Somebody read an article or read read our book. You've got to provide the training. And hand in hand with that, you've got to communicate OKRs. So a couple of points here. You want to communicate, you know, our point number 1 here, why are we engaging in OKRs? Because I guarantee you everybody will be asking that question. And kind of change management 101 is the acronym WIFM, W-I-I-F-M, right, which stands for what's in it for me. We encourage our clients to really communicate, you know, why would this be beneficial to an employee? Well, it helps gain clarity about what they're doing and how they can tie into the strategy. It helps them illuminate their contribution so that maybe they have more ammunition in their performance reviews. And ultimately helps drive engagement with the organization, but communicate what it's in it for them and how it's going to help them. And also, of course, communicate the OKRs themselves, if you develop that high level set of OKRs at the corporate level, I mean, that's the context for every OKR that will be created beneath, and so you need to communicate that clearly as well. So training and communication often go together, and we have to admit some of our clients overlook it, but it's to their detriment. So we'll just underscore the importance of that as well.
Yeah, and then as far as creating OKRs with a coach, I mean, the fine print here is we really recommend the very first time. I mean, we'd almost say that this is a requirement to be successful with OKRs at this point, okay? So we're coming out and saying it. Now, both Paul and I are OKRs coaches, so we're sort of, telling you, hey, hire us. But it's really not quite that simple. It's the very first time a team is setting OKRs, they need a coach, an external person. And it could be an internal, agile coach or like the OKR lead that Paul was describing in your own organization. Or it could be somebody like a Ben or a Paul, somebody outside your company coming in and saying, look, I'm going to help you create your OKRs for the first time. And that's just because that outsider asks the basic questions and they keep the team on track. And when you develop OKRs successfully the first time, it's just like all of a sudden the energy level and the enthusiasm for the OKRs project just goes right through the roof. And the whole process just becomes so much more efficient. Anything to add to that one, Paul, or do you want to move on to the next one?
I think we can move on. You said it really well. So the next one is number 7. We'll start with the second part of the sentence, mostly bottom up. You want a mix of OKRs that now some are naturally going to be top down. There's some OKRs that you're going to work with your boss and they're going to suggest that you have this and there'll be a negotiation process and you'll accept that. You might, you'll alter it a little bit to suit your circumstances, of course, but we can expect that in organizations. We kind of consider that kind of a vertical cascading almost of goals. But what we really want ideally is mostly bottom-up OKRs so that you're saying, okay, I understand the context of the organization, what the strategy is. Let me demonstrate to you how I can contribute to that. Here's my commitment, so here's my OKR. So ideally what we want is a mix of top-down, but mostly bottom-up OKRs to really drive, that, again, that engagement and get people involved and ultimately accelerate business results.
Yeah, and just I gotta interrupt you there, but the mostly bottom up part, and this is just sort of like, look, disclaimer for those of you that watched the John Doerr OKRs football example, where the company sets up the OKRs, and then what you do is you take the key results from the company and you say, okay, that becomes my objective for my team. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's totally the wrong way to go. That's actually taking top down to the extreme, and the reason why I emphasize this is that objective and a key result are different. You can't just simply take a key result from the top level and say, okay, that's my objective. Now, what you can do in order to ensure that you get mostly bottoms-up stuff is the team leader can say, hey, here are the objectives. And maybe the team leader comes in and says, by the way, here's a key result for each of the objectives. But I'm going to leave the room now, and I'm going to let the team, not the team leader, but I'm going to let the team, who's doing the work, actually sort of think through, well, what would the key results look like for that objective? Let's actually develop those as a team. And then what we do is we say maybe those 2 or 3 key results that the team develops now, the manager comes back into the room, sees those, and now we have that negotiation process where we're sort of seeing that the team is saying, here's how I think we would know how we've achieved the objective. So they're focusing more on the key results rather than the objectives. So I just wanted to emphasize that that's going to go hand in hand with owning the key results.
Right, that's a great add, Ben. So let's move on. Actually, number 8 is conduct a mid-quarter review, and we've talked about the importance of a cadence of just not setting and forgetting your OKRs. And so what we want to do is, what we emphasize or suggest is at least once during the quarter you hold this review. It doesn't have to be formal. There are a lot of different ways you can do this. It could be kind of a finger in the wind on here's what we think we're achieving with our OKRs, but you at least want to set in, because again, we're trying to create this habit where you're not setting and forgetting goals, you're looking back and you're making sure that you're learning about what's happening, and you can make alterations and course corrections for the remainder of the quarter. Really important. And we also suggest that you, if you can, you schedule these mid-quarter reviews in advance. Make a commitment to holding them. Otherwise, as we all know, with the million things we have going on, they just won't happen.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you just have this one check-in, now some people will suggest you have weekly check-ins, some people will suggest you have bi-weekly check-ins. What we found is that it depends on the team, right? So sometimes engineering teams already have this sort of bi-weekly meetings that they're doing. Hey, OKRs can be bolted right on top of that. Sometimes a sales or a marketing or a customer-facing team might already have weekly meetings. Hey, maybe you can talk about OKRs, for 5 to 10 minutes to kick off those meetings. So that's great. But some teams like R&D or, for example, maybe a finance team, look, they don't necessarily meet every week or even every other week. They may be meeting more ad hoc. And what we're not suggesting is that, oh, now that you're doing OKRs, that means you have to meet every week to talk about OKRs. What we're suggesting, though, is that you at least have this one mid-quarter review. That's a semi-formal plan for making sure that the team gets together to talk about OKRs, and you may even involve sort of your dependent teams that you work most closely with. So that's the minimal amount of discussion of OKRs that we say, okay, you can at least give yourself credit for doing OKRs. And then finally, we have document and share what you've learned. When Paul and I were working with several bigger companies, they would ask us the question, what is the ROI of OKRs? Well, here's the thing. I could tell you what's the ROI of OKRs for this company, or I could tell you here's the ROI of OKRs for that department, but really that's not relevant to you. You know, Google will tell me all sorts of great things about how OKRs is helping Google, but that's not relevant to you because you're doing OKRs in a different way. And so what we've done is we've turned this question back to you and we said, you as an organization, as an OKR using company, you need to each quarter figure out the answer to the question, what is the ROI of OKRs for your organization? What we've seen with the best practice organizations now is that different departments are submitting their OKR stories of how they've created ROI and value with OKRs to the senior level executives. And when the senior level executives, announce the OKRs each quarter or what have you, they share the 2 or 3 best stories, sort of the best of OKR moments with the organization. And this creates the momentum to sustain the project. So I just want to be really clear, because I know we're going to go into the Q&A now, that you need to figure out what is the value for your organization. You can't simply just extrapolate because Sears saved 8.5% or made 8.5% more revenue with this one team, that now that means that we're going to impact our bottom line by 8.5% simply by doing OKRs.
All right, that was great. That was great. So now we have a section about questions that some of you have emailed us. And then we actually have live questions that were just asked in the past 40 minutes. And they're broken down into 2 separate questions. So Refer is going to go through the questions that were pre-sent, which are these. And Ben and Paul, I'll just call them out and just let's do like this riffing on these. And some of the best insights will come from these questions. And then there's some really good ones also in the live questionnaire. And if you're coming up with more questions right now, please put them into that list. We will get to all of them in a couple of minutes. And please continue to ask. So let's do the first one. How do we figure out what our objectives should be? And then how do we figure out what the key results for each of these objectives should be? And how do we make them sound different? And I hear this question often in the sense that, like, well, what if the objective sounds too much like a key result? So who can take this one?
Go ahead, Ben.
Okay, so, well, first of all, let me take that third part of the question. How do we make sure objectives sound different and are not the same as KRs? I think I talked about it earlier. Whatever you do, don't copy and paste a key result and say now it's an objective, because if you do that, you're going to find that objectives and key results sound a lot alike because they're the same thing. I think one of the tricks to figuring out, what should your objectives be? Well, this is really the fundamental question. If you're asking that question, you're actually doing OKRs. How should we figure out what our objectives should be? So just asking that question is already a good thing. Usually, if you're talking about, it depends if you're talking about the company level or the team level, right? So I'm going to assume you're talking about the company level. Well, in which case, you're going to want to get your executive team together, and you're going to have to rely on the expertise of your executive team to think through what our objectives should be. And again, for this quarter or for this year, right? I think one of the most important points, Paul might back me up on this, is to make sure that the objectives are being created in the context of a long-term strategy, as opposed to like this objective just sounds really cool because, we could do it, or it's achievable, or it would be fun.
All right. So the second question is what to do when key results cannot be quantified. Can they just be measurable but not necessarily quantified?
So I'll jump in on that one because I thought the second part is interesting. Can they be measurable but not quantified? And I'm not sure how something can be measurable but not quantified. We're of the mind that anything can be quantified. If you think back earlier in the presentation, Ben talked about a client that had released push notification. And if we had more time today, and maybe we can do another webinar, we'd like to introduce you to the scoring system that we came up with, where even with that key result of a release push for notification, we quantified it. We talked about a certain target being releasing push notification in 5 countries, and a lower score was releasing in 3 countries, and a lower score than that even was just getting it ready for release. So you can quantify anything if you think about it creatively. So we really encourage you, even if you're looking at what we classically consider to be a milestone key result, break it down. What does success look like for that? Is there something you're going to be doing, next week, in the next, the next few weeks that we can actually quantify? We can apply to a number to just about anything. So we really think that you can quantify any key result. And again, if you look on our website, you'll find more information about the scoring system. Anything to add on that, Ben?
No, I think you totally nailed it. And then the third question, should every goal in the organization be aligned to the top goals? When is it okay not to align? I'll take that one. I'll just tell you, of course not. I mean, let me be really, really super, opinionated on this one, okay? I don't believe that every goal should be aligned to the top goals. There's so many reasons why, but let me just give you an example of where I saw this. So I was working with a company that had really good engagement overall. And so to tell the company that the top level, we should have some kind of improve the happiness of our employees objective would be somewhat insane because the company was doing really well. However, let's just look at one of the teams where maybe engagement really was actually a real problem, okay? I don't think that we should tell that team, I'm sorry, since we know engagement's a problem for your team, but we're not going to talk about that because that doesn't really connect to a top level goal. You should absolutely, as a team, be able to create an objective around, well, we're going to try to, improve the quality of our team and the level of engagement. And, we're going to create our key results around that. So that's absolutely okay not to align. What we need to be careful about is if something's in conflict. There's a huge difference between saying something's not aligned and saying this is in conflict.
Yeah,
right. And I'll pick up on that really briefly, Ben, because I've seen, and you have too, this is where OKRs, any system like this can break down. When you start forcing people to align everything to top level goals, then what they create is not relevant to them and it kind of defeats the entire purpose of it. So yeah, really great points there. Fourth question was, Zorian, did you want to make a point?
Well, no, I was just gonna probably say we have 13 minutes left. I think maybe some of these we can run through super fast because there's a lot of questions that people did ask live.
Well, number 4, we can just say we've taken that one already.
We covered it earlier, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And number 5, should goal setting be used as part of performance management? We can have an entire webinar on that. So we'll say really briefly, we'll say on that because it comes up frequently, is that we typically say OKRs can be part of a performance review or performance management process, but it does not dictate the entire thing. But again, that's a much bigger issue.
And well, that's one of our deployment parameters, and we think you need to be really clear about what the answer is for your organization. I mean, some of our clients don't even have, performance incentive systems in place yet. Right. The one thing I will say is whatever you do, the one thing you don't want to do is introduce OKRs at the exact same time that you're rolling out a whole new incentive compensation system across the company, and then say, oh, by the way, but these systems are different.
By the way,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. I just don't want to confuse people by saying that there's these multiple systems coming out at the same time. So you have to be strategic and very clear about where these systems overlap and where they're different. And you have to get the executive team to align on that. There's no single answer, though. So that's why you have to figure this out. And it may even vary across teams, right? So in some engineering teams don't get bonuses at all, but yet they love OKRs. Whereas some sales teams, they get bonuses, but then they decide, well, we don't even need OKRs. So we have so it's really a deep question, like Paul said, where we can analyze it for a long time. But the basic point that I want to make for you is you need to answer this question for yourself. There's no single right answer. That's the key.
Yeah, it's circumstantial. I was going to add that in a couple of minutes, we're actually going to let 10 people win the book that Paul and Ben wrote. And actually on page 144, there's a whole section on OKRs and performance reviews, which I highly recommend for everyone to read so that it answers a lot of this there. Well, let's run through the last 3 fairly quickly and then get to the open ones.
Sure. I think we should just skip to the last one, Zorian, because we want to get to these live questions.
Let's do it.
And I can't resist, though, Ben, and I can't resist this last one. OKR is just a passing fad or a niche concept. And I sort of chuckle at that because, we started out today by talking about Peter Drucker and the MBO concept from 1954. OKRs have become really popular now, again, because of the Google implementation and they're really hot in Silicon Valley. But ideas like this have deep ancestral roots. OKRs are also sometimes compared to systems like Balanced Scorecard. And Balanced Scorecard, you could actually trace its roots back to a system developed by French engineers in the late 1890s. So these ideas, have been around for a long time. But what we're benefiting from now is that we're creating a really solid taxonomy around them. We're setting, a set of parameters. Like Ben talked about the deployment parameters. I think we're tightening them up and we're modernizing them for today's business environment. So.
Yeah, and
Definitely.
I think one thing I would add to that, Paul, is that it's, to me, and again, I think it's a great question because many of you are probably saying, OKRs, what's that? Is that a buzzword? Is this one of those new things? And I think you're right to ask the question, is it just another passing fad? Because there are so many crazy business acronyms out there that are passing fads. What I'll tell you is that the companies that use OKRs, it's not just Google where, they started with 20 people or whatever, and now they have 50,000 or something. It's not just Google. There are major companies around the world that are implementing OKRs, and the thing is, it's sticking. It's one of those things that if you start doing OKRs and you start thinking about what are our key results, you do this for a couple quarters, you would never want to go to work for a company that didn't do OKRs. You would think that they were completely insane not to have OKRs. The reason I say that is, otherwise, how do I know what our company's strategy is? How do I know if we're making progress? I mean, what about my team? How do I know if my team's making progress? And so if you have the equivalent of an OKR system, you might call it something else. And there's, the big rocks, or there's a number of systems out there, even MBOs to some extent, you could give yourself some credit for that. You may be able to get by without saying you're using OKRs, but you do need to have some kind of a goal system in place that has a standard nomenclature. I think that's really becoming the standard for all organizations. And so my guess is you'll see that OKRs will start to gain more and more popularity and traction just because of, again, its ease of use and its proven, success and track record over the last 50 or so years.
Yeah, this is great. This is a really great answer to that because that comes up sometimes. And I just tell people, look, I mean, goals are not going away. I mean, setting objectives for the purpose of creating alignment and tracking progress, how is that possible to go away if you're running an organization? And OKRs are just the modern way of doing that. So obviously it's here to stay. So anyway, that was really great. And by the way, if anybody wants, we're going to write a blog post on this and answer these and transcribe this. So of course we'll have it. So there are a lot of really great open questions, and I still want to give away that book. We have 8 minutes left, so I'm going to run through the next section super fast. It's really just about us for anyone who's wondering, well, what really does A-Team do? A-Team is just a product for managing your goals, specifically OKRs. It's rooted in OKRs and allows you to connect that if you want to the modern ongoing performance check-ins, not like the full-blown performance management that Ben and Paul said, like it's circumstantial. You don't know if you necessarily want to connect those or not, but it allows you to do it in a modern way that works with OKRs. And then, of course, the one thing that wasn't covered in this particular webinar, but I think we should have the more advanced version of this webinar is like alignment. Alignment is hard to do without software. This screenshot is basically how our alignment visualization works. It's sort of like the analogy of organizational structure, org chart, org hierarchy, but in the context of goals. How do goals connect? How do they align? And how does progress of contributing goals actually move the progress bar on the goals above or cross-functionally? And we talked about how cross-functional is important to reduce silos. But all the math gets to work and all the progresses are interconnected mathematically. So with that said, I do want to give away 10 books. This book is awesome. If you really want to get to learn a ton about OKRs and how to apply them practically, it's the best book out there on the topic. It's fantastic. It's like a Bible of OKRs. We're giving away 10 for free. Just go to ateam.com/win-the-book, separated by dashes over here. Just fill out like 3 fields or 4 fields or whatever. It's for our live demo, and after seeing a demo, we will send it to you or get Amazon to send it to you. So with that said, let's talk about these open questions that we have, and there's some really good ones. We have 6 minutes left, and by the way, you also have emails for Paul and Ben. If you want to hire Paul and Ben for training and coaching, they really are fantastic, and they work with some of the best companies out there with a ton of hands-on, practical, real-world experience. So here we go. First question is from Peter. What is the best way to stop the staff from using to-dos as key results. I feel a lot of people tend to do that. And a follow-up to that, is it right or wrong to have to-dos as key results?
Well, I think that the second part first, really quick, and I know Ben will want to provide input on this as well. Yeah, it is definitely wrong. Tasks are not key results, and I think in Peter's question, he's probably suggesting that to-dos are what Ben and I would consider tasks, something that you can do in a day, you can clear up really quickly. As to get people to stopping using tasks, I think it comes back to something else we talked about, provide education. If you're new to OKRs and you haven't got a uniform way of using them across the organization, people may just not know the difference. So my first advice would be just to use some of the tools we talked about today that are in our book and on the internet, so that you can distinguish between what an effective OKR looks like versus a task, and then help coach people to know and utilize the difference. Ben?
Yeah, and just add on to that, I mean, the very first thing that people do when they do OKRs is they do just like what Peter said. They're going to list their tasks. It's almost, I would say, half the time that you're going to run into this. Well, that's why you need that OKRs coaching. And remember, you don't want to tell them they're doing it wrong. You don't want to tell them, oh, this is bad. What you want to tell them is, okay, so that objective is pretty good, and okay, so these are the things that look like you're saying that the key results. Those are the things that, actually, as I'm looking at that list, those look more like the things we need to do in order to achieve the objective. So let me just ask you a few questions about those kind of task items. And then the fundamental question you have to ask is, what is the intended outcome of doing the task? How will we know the task was a success? Yeah. And another way of asking this is, if we didn't do the task, how will we know that there's a problem here and we won't have achieved our objective?
All right, that was great. Okay, so we have a bunch more here. So one here is, I'm in the process of making a proposal to implement OKRs in the organization I work for. The problem I'm finding is that I see that key results can respond to two questions. How will I get there? And how do I know I got there? The first one gives me information on how my plan is going. The second one on whether my actions have had an impact in reality in the end. Do you agree with setting the first type of key result at the topmost of the organization and the other one at the bottom for execution?
Well, I don't know if I totally understood the question, but I think it's similar to the first question, which is simply, look, key results should be the outcomes. How will I know I've achieved the objective at the end of the period? That's really the guidance on that. Yep. Now, if there's some activities that you think are really important to get you there, you could totally list those as key activities in like a separate column, because it's not to say that activities aren't important. Many activities are very important, but the question is, how will we measure the impact of those activities? And in some cases, we find out that there are certain activities we can't even measure the impact. We don't know what the impact will be of those activities. And even in some cases, we still know we need to do those activities. But we just don't want to list those as key results. Otherwise, we're going to get confused. So I think you just go to the next question. Yeah.
Got it. So someone is asking here, people get hung up, and we have 2 minutes left, but people get hung up about making the OKRs. Any advice?
You mean like achieving the OKRs?
I guess, yeah, that's just a short question. People get hung up about actually achieving, yeah, I guess making the OKRs would be, or no, about marking the, I'm guessing they're probably talking about achieving them, and I'm not sure also what that means.
Well, I think it's probably, yeah, people are thinking once you make a public commitment to a goal, there's a lot of pressure on you. So maybe they're talking about that, and people getting hung up on achieving their scores. And we would suggest, and one of the things we talk about in the book, is that you want to use OKRs for learning, and certainly you don't want to punish people if they don't achieve the results. And this is why we decouple it from performance reviews and compensation, because otherwise people won't stretch. The idea is you stretch really far. If you don't make it, well, what happened? Why didn't you? So I don't know where this rule of thumb came from. Maybe Ben can shine a light on this, but people suggest that you want to achieve about 70% of your OKRs. Now, I'm not sure if that number is correct or not, but that seems to be out there in the literature. But the basic idea here is use OKRs for learning. Don't get caught up on achieving every one. The idea is, again, to learn from your results.
Yeah, and I had a friend at a Fortune 500 company who was doing OKRs, and they created a kind of a culture of learning where each team would actually say, here was our biggest win, but here was our biggest failure and learning moment, key learning moment. And people were actually more excited to brag about their biggest failure and what they learned. That became more interesting to share than to talk about their biggest win. And so they really created a culture of like, oh yeah, well, we thought this, and it turns out it only took us 2 weeks to realize that this whole thing was a waste of time. So we actually had to destroy this entire OKR in the middle of a quarter. And that's a big failure, but in a way it's a success. So you want to create that psychological safety. That's a really big predictor of success with OKRs. If you're working in a company, and I won't name cultures or something, but we've seen certain cultures where everybody has to be at 100% successful all the time, or there's sort of a fear-based culture. Actually, you're not a good fit for OKRs, because remember, with OKRs, the whole point is to set really aspirational goals, knowing that in many cases you're not going to achieve that. And that, so the default is you probably won't achieve that key result. But wouldn't it be amazing if you did? So if you don't really want to aim for amazing and kind of stretch yourself, actually OKRs may not be a good fit for you. I think that's really it's important to being open to knowing that like OKRs are not a panacea that solves all the world's problems. It's not going to work with every single organization and every single culture.
Great. So we are at the top of the hour, and I'm noticing some people are hopping off, I guess, for the next call or whatnot. We do have a couple more questions here. What we're going to do is we're going to cover them in our follow-up blog post that we'll send to everyone with more details. And of course, you have Paul's and Ben's email. You have our information as well. You can just email to hello@ateam. And thank you all so much for your time. Paul, Ben, thank you so much. This was really fantastic. Very, very educational for everyone. And maybe we'll do a more advanced one at some point this year too. That'll be fun.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Ryan.
thanks, Dorian. A lot of fun.
Pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a good day. Bye-bye.